Today, we're going to talk about decisions and making really powerful decisions. I originally was going to record this just as a business session, and I realized, you know what, we're making decisions in all parts of our life, right? In our life, in our career, in our business, in retirement. So throughout the course of our day, we're making 35,000 plus decisions. And those can range from relatively simple decisions, things like what are we going to wear, to more complex decisions, things that might require other people's input or lots of information or data. And then also continuous decisions, things that we're redeciding on a regular basis throughout the course of the day. An example of that would be something like a meal plan. And if you've ever worked with me to develop a healthy meal plan or a protocol, you know that one of the tools that we use is to decide what you're going to eat 24 hours ahead of time. You can eat anything that you want. You could have ice cream, you can have pizza, it doesn't matter. You just need to make that decision with your prefrontal cortex using your executive function 24 hours ahead of time. You write it down and then you commit to it. And so these continuous decisions, which can feel very draining, are where you've made the decision already with your prefrontal cortex. But when you get in the moment, your primitive brain starts to freak out a little bit. And so it says something like, I know that we planned on eating chicken and broccoli, but I really want the pizza. And so we have to redecide in that moment that we are going to stick to our plan. Another example of this that I see quite frequently is things that we put onto our calendar. So we might decide ahead of time and plan our day and create our calendar, and that we're going to, let's say, work on a project later in the afternoon. We get to that 2 o'clock time frame where we're supposed to work on that project, and we have to redecide or recommit that that's what we're going to do in that moment. So there's lots of different types of decisions that we're making. And I see quite frequently when my clients first come to me and we're talking about this idea of decisions, that there's some things that commonly get in the way. Now, the number one thing that I see is that people are afraid of making the wrong decision, or quote unquote, the wrong decision. And here's what I have to say about the wrong decision. There is no wrong decision. And I know that some of you might not believe me. However, there is no wrong decision. There's also no right decision. So decisions are neutral. They are just what is going to happen. Okay. They are the neutral circumstance. They are not right. They are not wrong. And when we start to release that judgment or that qualification of right or wrong, decisions actually become much easier. And what happens is we make the decision, and let's say we didn't get the outcome that we wanted from that decision. Instead of labeling it as the wrong decision and judging ourselves for making the wrong decision, what we can then do is make another decision to go in a different direction and get ourselves out of that situation. But if we're labeling it as wrong and we're judging ourselves, we tend to stay in that situation longer than we need to. But if we start to take the power back and believe very confidently in our ability to make decisions and make really solid decisions, regardless of the outcome, what that means is that we have our own back and we will get ourselves to the next place that we need to, if that's something that has to happen. So that fear of making the wrong decision can sometimes keep us from making a decision in the first place. The other thing that we might do, and the fear that might come up, is from past experiences. If we, again, have labeled things as right or wrong, we might look at those decisions that we've labeled as wrong, and we might say, you know what, my past experience is that I make a lot of wrong decisions, and therefore I don't want to make more. So again, that fear comes up because of that labeling. The other thing that I see is this kind of tendency to offload our responsibility of making decisions to either others or to time. So what I mean by that is that you might say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to wait, and I'm not necessarily going to make this decision, because if I wait long enough, somebody else is going to come in and make the decision for me, or time will have passed and then the decision will just be off the table, or it will make itself. And so you're abdicating the responsibility of making the decision to either somebody else or to time in general. So those are some of the things that I commonly see as being challenging for my clients. Now, this idea of not making a decision and kind of sitting in indecision is ultimately what both of those scenarios bring us to, whether it's the fear of making the wrong decision or abdicating responsibility to somebody else. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're sitting in indecision, which is a decision in and of itself. So you're making the decision to actually stay right where you are, unchanged in the moment. Now, that is a valid option. All I want you to do is recognize that if you are going to choose staying exactly where you are, it should be conscious instead of non-conscious. So if you're just sitting there and you're not making the decision and you're ruminating and you're kind of, staying in this circular pattern, you're making a non-conscious decision to stay right where you are. Instead, what you want to do is bring that to the forefront as being a viable option, where you could say, okay, I could go in this direction. That's option number one. I could go in this option. That's option number two. Option number three, that would be do absolutely nothing and stay right where we are. So now you're able to observe it as being a conscious option instead of just ruminating in indecision. Okay. All right. So the reason that we want to make decisions is because decisions give us power. When we make a decision, we are bringing more confidence to the forefront, and we're also creating more clarity and direction as to where we want to go. The moment we make a decision, we can put more energy towards that decision and align all of our actions so we can get our desired results. But when we sit in indecision, again, the energy that we have is going to the staying exactly where we are, or kind of voting, casting a vote for the version of us that is exactly where we are. When we make a decision, let's say to choose a new job or to retire, or I just recently made the decision to buy a plunge pool. Once you make that decision, you're casting a vote for that future version of yourself. When you stay in indecision, again, you're casting a vote for the current version of you. And it doesn't matter what your decision is. I don't care what you end up deciding on, right? But the power of the decision and making the decision is what's going to give you clarity and energy. Finally, it creates commitment within ourselves. And it also builds more trust that we are able to make decisions when we need to. So the more we make decisions and the more we make them consciously versus non-consciously, we're paying attention to them as we're making them, and we're actually weighing them out, that will allow us to understand that in the future, when we need to make decisions, we know how to do it. We've gone through this process before and we've done it with intention. Therefore, it's not as scary. But when we're making decisions, but not doing so consciously, we don't teach ourselves that we have the ability to have our own back. So those are some of the reasons that we want to make decisions in the first place. Now let's talk about how we can go about making better decisions. Now, you know me, I love questions. So I've created a list of questions for you. You can go to the worksheet that is attached to this session so that you can get all of these questions. You don't have to sit here and feverishly jot them down. But I want to walk through these with you so that you know exactly what it is that you need to be asking of yourself and how to answer these when you get to that work. All right, so let's start out with, how do you create a decision-making persona for yourself? This is the first step in the process. So what we want to do is we want to ask ourselves the question, who am I as a decision maker? Who am I? Now, for me, in the past, when I went through this exercise myself, what I found was that I was a very impulsive decision maker. And I would make decisions very quickly. And what I would find is that after I made them, I would kind of regret some of the things that I had done. It could be, a move of a job. It could be making a purchase. I would make decisions very quickly, and I wouldn't necessarily weigh out the pros and the cons and think through methodically what those decisions would mean and the impacts that they would have. So that's where I started telling myself that I was bad at making decisions or that I made the wrong decisions frequently. But ultimately, when I started to look at this and I looked at, who is my decision-making persona, I found out that it wasn't that I was making wrong decisions, it's that I was making decisions impulsively, okay? So then I asked myself, who do I want to be as a decision maker? Who do I want to be? And what I found was that I wanted to be somebody who was more methodical, somebody who was thoughtful, somebody who aligned my values with the decisions that I was making. So that leads me to the next question here that I want you to ask yourself, which is, what are the values that I want to filter my decisions through? So when I sat down and I went through my own values exercise, and again, I know I talk about this values exercise quite a bit. If you haven't gone through our values exercise, it's from our first month, from April. And so when we created awareness inside of our life coaching cohort, part of that awareness exercise was to come up with your own personal values. So if you haven't gone through that exercise, I highly recommend that you do. But if you come up with your own list of values, this will become a really wonderful filter as you are trying to make decisions. Okay. So that first part is, who am I as a decision maker? Who do I want to be as a decision maker? And what are the values that I want to filter my decisions through? Okay. Now, the second part of this is, what is my decision-making process? Okay. So this has got 9 different questions. I'm going to walk through all of these with you, but these 9 questions will really help you to ensure that you aren't making impulsive decisions and you aren't getting into that judgment place of quote unquote making the wrong decision. Okay. So the first one is, what are the potential options that I'm considering? Now I'm going to use an example here. I recently bought a plunge pool for my backyard to do cold plunging. If you have listened to our longevity episode where Michael Fetterman and I were talking about living a life on purpose and the elements of longevity, you'll know one of the things we talked about was cold therapy, and then I've recently bought a plunge pool. So this process that I went through to make this decision is what we're going to use as an example here. So what I did was I started out with, what are the potential options that I'm considering? So first option was buy the cold plunge pool. Okay. Then it was, all right, well, which one would I buy? There are a number of different options that are out there. Each of those options have different features. So I needed to kind of list out some of the high level options of what are the different companies that I could go to make this purchase. The other options that I could consider would be to go to a local place that has a cold plunge pool. So we're here in Denver. So Denver Sports Recovery, my partner, he goes there, he does cold plunging there. So I could buy a membership and I could go and I could do cold plunging with him. The third option was to do nothing at all. So that was the third option. I could just not go to Denver Sports Recovery. I could not buy a cold plunge pool. I could do nothing at all. I guess the fourth option would have been, I could just start doing cold showers. That would be another option. Okay. So the first step in this process is list out all of the options that are on the table. And then ask yourself, is there anything else that I'm not considering? And it doesn't matter whether or not it's a good option or a bad option. We aren't trying to judge the options. We're just trying to get out all of the options. Okay. The second question that I needed to ask myself was, what information did I need in order to make this decision? So, I looked at all of the different options that I had, and I asked myself, what is the cost associated with it? What is the time? What is the money? What is the energy? How much would I use each of these options? What are the maintenance situations with each of these options, right? So if I'm going to Denver Sports Recovery, I have to consider the time it's going to take me to drive there. And if I get there and there are people that are using the cold plunge pool and I want to be in the cold plunge pool, is there additional time that's associated with that? How much money is associated with a membership versus getting my own here? What is the time associated with the option that's already pre-cooled versus if I had to fill it up with ice each time? So really think through all of the data, all of the information that you need to gather. Start at a very high level and list out all of the different categories. Then you come back and you start filling the information in. Number 3, what are my concerns about each of these options? So this is something that your brain is naturally going to want to go to the worst case scenario. It just goes there because, as we've talked about previously, our brain is wired to survive, not to thrive. So it always wants to go to the worst case scenario and come up with all of the reasons as to why you shouldn't be doing this. So you want to look at the concerns, but you don't want to spend a ton of time here. Number 4, what are the reasons that I love this option? Okay, this is probably the most important question that you can be asking yourself. So what are the reasons that I love this option? Again, your brain goes to the negative place. It always wants to come up with the concerns. So what we want to do is actively go to this positive place and come up with all of the positive reasons that we want to do each of these options. So my option of buying the plunge pool and having it here, the reason that I love that option is because it helps me to create a daily routine. And it also aligns with my future self, who I am becoming, who I am creating in terms of this wellness individual. The reason that I love the idea of the Denver sports recovery is that I could start immediately. There is no downtime. And I also don't need to worry about the upkeep and maintaining it. But when I start to look at this from the next lens, the next question, which is what are my values and how does each option align with my values? I go back and I look at, health, intention, and abundance are three of the values that I really was filtering this particular option through, these decisions through. And so when I start to add those values on, the answer really became clear. When I looked at all of the data and the cost associated with each of the decisions and how often I was going to use them and the friction and the fact that my values are health and intention and abundance, what I decided was that I was going to buy the unit and put it in the backyard. That was what made sense to me. And when I think about making that decision and how it feels, which is your next question, so how do I feel about each of the options? It was so crystal clear that I felt really good about my decision to buy the unit instead of all of the other options. So then I asked myself the question, how do I need to grow in order to be the person that gets the outcomes that I want? And so this is a really interesting question to ask yourself, because you're going to find a lot of the resistance that may have come up in the past that was keeping you in fear of making decisions in the first place. So when I examine this for myself, what are the things that I would need to do in order to grow into the person that would get the outcome of using the unit in the backyard every single day? I would need to grow into a person that is, comfortable with being cold first thing in the morning. I would need to give up some of my comforts. I would need to learn how to take care of the units and make sure that I would keep it from freezing when it does drop below freezing here in Denver. I would need to learn how to maintain the unit so that it was staying clean. I would need to invest in the materials to keep it clean. So asking yourself that question of who do I need to grow into and what are some of the things that I would need to give up, learn, invest, grow, believe in, just meet yourself where you are and think about all of the different things that will come up for you. By doing that, you're going to be able to anticipate some of that frustration and some of that resistance. And then you're going to be able to use your prefrontal cortex to come up with a plan to make sure that you're able to do all the things that you need to do. Okay. Number 8 is, what would it look like to have my own back in making this decision? This one is so important because chances are we're not going to be, batting 1,000 with our decisions. There are going to be times where they don't work out the way that we think that they're going to, and we're going to have to recommit to ourselves over and over and over again. So what would it look like to have your own back? So for me, I made the decision of buying the unit. What it's going to look like for me to have my own back there is that when the judgment pops up, I remind myself of all of the reasons that I loved my decision. And when any unanticipated issues arise, I am going to find a solution for them instead of judging them and making that mean that I made the wrong decision. And if something is unsurmountable, I'm going to come up with the next decision that I need to make, which might be something like, do I sell it? Do I get rid of it? Do I need to install new electrical in order to support it? Like whatever it's going to be, but I'm going to solve for the problems instead of judging myself for the fact that problems arose. Okay. And then the final question is, what is the next step in this process? So for me, it's pretty simple. Order the plunge. But for you, what is the next step in this process? It might be that you need more information. It might be that you need to have a conversation with somebody. It might be that you need to get more experience somewhere. Whatever it is for you, what is the next step in the process? And if you don't know the answer to that, just what is any next step? It doesn't need to be the right next step. It's just what is one step that will move you forward in this process? All right. So hopefully that will help you in your decision-making process. Again, there is a worksheet that has all of these questions outlined for you so that you can go through that process yourself. Please feel free to bring any decisions that you maybe are struggling with to either our live office hour sessions, or please feel free to engage with us on a one-on-one basis, and we would be happy to do some individual coaching. All right. Until next time, be well.